Welcome to Act 2 You're On. Join us weekly at our studio roundtable as Rhonda
and Kate invite spectacular guests to weigh in on staying vibrant and healthy.
Launch your next great act with authenticity and purpose.
Summon your courage, superstar, and step into the limelight. So grab a coffee
or a martini
and let's set the stage for a grand entrance. It's Act 2.
You're on.
Greetings, friends. Kate Levy here in the A2YO studio and happy to be joined by my dear friend and fabulous producer behind the scenes, the woman with the signature cackle, Kathy Carswell. Rhonda is on assignment. To our listeners, do you or someone you love struggle with learning differences, behavioral issues, or mental health challenges? We all know the modern world is a complex place, societally, environmentally, politically. So how are we supposed to navigate this complexity without, say, executive function skills, when our complex learning differences leave us with self-esteem so low we are tripping over it? Well, if you have ever wondered how to get the help you or a struggling loved one might need, then you are tuning in to a fascinating conversation that might just reignite a sense of hope. We will be talking today to Courtney Edman. Courtney has been in your shoes. She is not only a coach, but she's also the parent of a neurodivergent young adult son with ADHD, anxiety, and significant lagging executive function skills. She knows what it takes to guide you and your child to a place of calm and connection, while also giving your family the tools that will lead to understanding and success. Through her years as a pediatric early intervention physical therapist, serving also as the executive director of a home-based pulmonary physical therapy practice, combined with her over 22 years of parenting 3 young adult children, she is the coach and the solution you've been searching for. No matter your child's age, stage, diagnoses, Courtney has the knowledge and the skills to help you, your child, and your family. Courtney believes that kids do well if they can, and so does Act 2 You're On. So welcome, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Kate and Kathy. I'm so glad to be here to share all of this hope-filled information with you and your listeners.
Well, this is a conversation I have been dying to have with you. And we have tried several times with schedules colliding, and here we finally are. The timing could not be more perfect. I think this is what the world is searching for. A lot of people are struggling, whether it's themselves or it's their children or somebody they love. And I want folks to know this is going to be a very hopeful conversation and a helpful conversation. I think we should just dive in. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, Courtney, a little bit about your journey from physical therapist to coaching kids who are neurodiverse, who have complex learning profiles, and coaching their parents.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I am a trained and licensed physical therapist. I started my professional career as an early intervention physical therapist, which for people who may not know is for birth to 3-year-olds in the homes, working with people that have all types of developmental disabilities, diagnoses, or not yet diagnosed, and just having some developmental delays, and coaching their parents, helping them to learn about what's going on with their bodies and their brains, perhaps, and guiding them. And that eventually led to another part of my journey as an executive director. And all the while I'm doing these physical therapy things professionally, I am parenting children and trying to find a way to support my son, who's in the middle of 2 highly regulated, highly driven young ladies. And the parenting skills that I'm using with them are just not working with him. And I sought help from teachers, principals, guidance counselors, social workers. I sought help from my pediatrician. I sought help from parents, friends, and I'm a pretty resourceful, problem-solving person, and yet I couldn't find the help or an ally that I needed. Ultimately, what ended up happening was when he was 17, we had a neuropsychological evaluation, which we previously had been advised by some of the people I had worked with not to get for him because it wouldn't give us any more information. And in that neuropsychological report were the words twice exceptional, which I'd never heard before. And for the listeners, what it means is your child has high cognitive ability or giftedness, but also has a learning disability and or ADHD. when I read that, there weren't recommendations in the neuropsych report related to that, only to the ADHD, but I dove in. And when I dove in and then got my son a coach, I was like, this is the answer that explains the journey. I started talking with the owner of the company who provided the coach for my son. And he sort of took me under his wings and said, I think you need to be a coach. And at the same time, I was hoping to be a coach, and off I went. And here I am. I've learned so much about what it takes to be a parent and to have an incredible relationship with your child after having a very, very challenging relationship with my son that was filled with shame and filled with, for me, and also as he articulated to me at one point in time when he was in high school, he'd rather lie about having done something than face the reality that he would not yet done something again that he knew he was supposed to do. I knew he was struggling with shame. To support the kids who are not getting the support that they need to build the skills that are getting in the way of their success and sharing their gifts with the world is what I'm now called to do, I believe. And I think that my role as a PT, my role as a parent, my professional world and my personal world have blended together in a way that has prepared me for this role as coach, to meet people where they are, see them for their strengths, and help them move forward in a life that they envision for themselves, that they don't have to apologize for at all. So,
well, thank you for sharing your story and for embarking on this incredibly important work. I hear a little bit in your story, shades of my own, and I feel like I did so much reading and searching and humbly asking for help, only at that juncture for there not to be a coach that was readily available, that people to whom they could refer me. It's not only my story. It's not only your story. It's a very common story. And I love the compassion with which you approach your work. So I'm grateful to learn more. And I feel like I'm going to ask you this question that I personally know why this work is so relevant, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit why you feel that your work is so relevant right now in this world.
Well, it's interesting. I wrote a blog about COVID and executive function skills because I feel like during the time of COVID, a lot of anxiety came out and, a lot of anxiety, and that impacts the brain, right? And so actually, let me back up just a little bit. Mental health is at the forefront of conversations that we're having. And anxiety, learning disabilities aren't necessarily grouped within mental health, but they are invisible disabilities in the same way that mental health challenges are also invisible many times. And they are brain-based and they are neurobiologically, neurochemically based, right? And it all has to do with the way that the brain is wired and the way that the brain functions. And the reason I brought up the COVID and the blog is because I think it just resulted in a heightened level of anxiety and of depression, which then impacts the brain. And these ADHD and autism and dyslexia, dyspraxia, all of these neurodiverse diagnoses that are brain-based. And I think that is the piece that culture in general is missing. We know that they're brain-based, and yet we're taking a behavioral modification approach to changing what the manifestations of these disabilities many times. That's not getting at the root of the skills that aren't there. And that's not getting at the root of how the brain is wired differently than for people who do not have those diagnoses.
Yeah.
So it's missing the mark. And a lot of times when people are told they should be doing something, they're lazy, they're not motivated because of that behavioral modification type approach. When that doesn't work, the invisibility of it all makes it seem like they're just lazy or they're unmotivated. But what's happening is we need to figure out what's going on with their brain and how is their brain working? How are they perceiving the world? And approach it in the same way as we do reading, math, writing. Because for kids who can't read in school, right, we don't just say, well, look harder at the words. We don't just say, well, you must not want to read. What we do is we take a step back and we peel the onion Jill Stoll from Stoll Learning Centers talks about peeling the onion. I think it's Jill Stoll. I could be wrong. But it's about peeling the onion and figuring out what is at the root of what's getting in the way. What are the obstacles? If we assume that kids want to do well, which is a Dr. Ross Green saying, if we assume that kids want to do well, and generally most people want to do well, they don't want to have a difficult life for themselves. If we assume they want to do well, we need to peel the onion and figure out what's at the root of this and take a lens that's not just behavioral. We can take the behavioral approach initially, but if that's not working, let's take a step back and say, what's getting in the way? And what are the other things that might be getting in the way in order to provide the support that the kids actually need that will then result in their ability to do well? And a lot of times it takes us as parents, as teachers, it takes time, which is a precious resource. And particularly in the schools, it's really challenging to find that time and that one-on-one time to provide that explicit instruction. And yet they do it for reading, they do it for math, they do it for writing. And those are academic skills, which without executive function skills, the academic skills are going to be harder to learn. Because executive function skills are involved in reading, are involved in math, are involved in writing. And so if we can really support these executive function skills at a younger age and be very explicit about it, and there are resources for that. I don't teach it, I don't coach that specifically, but there's some really, really great people out there that do. If we could do that, and in the meantime, I can support your child outside of school, I think it would make a world of difference, especially for the neurodiverse group of people, but it would benefit everybody, really.
Well, and I love the name of your company, To Tame the Shame, because I do think that so much of this becomes like we get shamed, and the earlier we can get intervention when it comes to executive function, just as we would approach reading, then maybe we can prevent the shame turning into more severe mental health issues and other challenges where we get stuck at the back of our brain because we're embarrassed and then we're ashamed and then we can't move forward to the problem solving, the executive function part of our brain because we're already laden by second or third grade with these labels that we can't get out from under. And it's heartbreaking to watch that happen, especially when you can tell that your kid is very intelligent and then they get trapped. And then, it is a cycle that gets out of control. I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit more about this term neurodiversity and also maybe about complex learning? So that's a double whammy of a question, neurodiversity, and then we'll talk about complex learning profiles.
Yes. So the term neurodiversity was coined by a woman named Judy Singer, and it kind of jumps off of the concept of biodiversity. That in this world of brains, there's a whole host of ways in which it shows up. And just like everybody's heart can be different, everybody's, different organs can be different. And there are different ways in which they are still strong, not strong, or in need of medication or not in need of medication, right? That we don't have control over how our brain is. And the way that people's brains are not bad, don't need to be fixed, right? So that's the concept of neurodiversity. It's not that they need to be fixed. It's just that we need to understand them. And we need to help people who are living with the brains that they have understand the strengths that their brains have, the way that they are perceiving the world, the way that it allows them to interact with the world, and meet them where they are, and then say, what's next? And how can we help you work with the brain you've been given, understand it, follow your heart? We'll follow your brain, right? But follow the strengths that you have. And let's take a strengths-based approach. Let's take a whole person approach to find out who you are, what you love, and build from there instead of going from a deficit-focused approach of, well, this is what your brain doesn't allow you to do. And until you can do what your brain doesn't allow you to do, you're not going to be able to do the stuff that your brain wants you to do. And so it's really about that concept that there's a wide variety of ways in which the brain exists, and none of it is wrong. And this world needs all types of brains to approach the complex problems that we have. And let's celebrate those differences instead of dividing and and saying, well, this is the way that it's supposed to be, and this is the way that it's not supposed to be. So that's the concept of neurodiversity.
I love that you've been able to explain that so succinctly. Boy, I experience that a lot in my work. So I work with artists quite often, and I love to dive into their brains. And often they are ADHD brains, but I'll tell you, their brains can go places that I can only hope to follow. And I love to dance around in there because they'll think of things that I would never have conceived. And how awesome to collaborate with a different brain type. And I see that when I've worked with athletes and ADHD, there's quite a bit of literature out there about how athletes often have ADHD, and those were part of the warrior class that had to be able to kind of be scanning the horizon and being able to pick up on lots of different topics or different impulses. And when we try to squash that into a tiny little box that we say, oh, but this is the way, this is the ideal, squash yourself into this little box, it's very confining, and it's not respectful of the fact that we want diversity in every single way, including our brains.
We're celebrating diversity. We're in an era of celebrating diversity. It's just neurodiversity is not yet there. And
Yes.
so that's part of the conversation that we're having, is to bring that to light and share that with the world, that because it's invisible also,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So how can we celebrate the many ways in which people show up in this world, including neurodiverse ways?
Maybe if we stop thinking of this as being broken, this is our superpower. I think that that's actually what we hope in life, every single individual to bring out the best. And that's actually probably what the world needs, is for us to all show up, best version of ourselves. And how boring it would be if we were all the same. But maybe that's when we get to that point, and maybe, Courtney, we're here today trying to do our part in bringing about this next evolution, this next understanding of the brilliance of diversity in society. I think it's such a compassionate understanding that you have, and I so appreciate it. I'm wondering.
And I'm not the only one out there, Kim.
No. I think this is
when I dove into this concept of twice exceptionality, there's this whole world, the world of people who are just trying to get the words of neurodiversity and trying to celebrate the strengths of people and to support people. So
yes, but I have to say I had to go looking and searching.
Yes. It's not yet big enough.
Right. And hopefully,
loud enough.
Yeah. So we're trying to be noisy here today. And I'm wondering if you can talk about executive functions now. What are those skills, and how does someone navigate life without executive function?
It's very difficult. I also wanted to go back and just touch a little bit your question about complex learning profiles. So complex learning profiles simply mean, if you're thinking about the world of neurodiversity, we use the terms neurotypical and we use the terms neurodivergent, right? And so if you think of someone who knows how to get up in the morning, make their breakfast, they've set their alarm, they've kind of put things in order for what they're going to need, they can think about and see themselves walking through their day, they are, to use the term, self-regulated, they can manage their emotions, they have impulse control, and they can do things that they don't necessarily like to do, and think about it in terms of, well, if I get this done, at least I can go do what I want to do, right? So that's more of the neurotypical type of brain, in which rewards and consequences and behavioral modification does work, because they can think before they act over time, right? Like, I'm not talking toddlers, people, right? You start to get to upper elementary, middle school, and they're the ones who are using the planners, understanding how to approach their day and do their homework, and you take their phones away, or say you're going to take their phones away, or lose privileges. Those are neurotypical people, because they respond to those types of incentives, consequences, etc. The neurodivergent brains do not. And those are people who have ADHD, who have autism, who have other learning disabilities that impact their ability to think in that logical way. And so rewards and consequences, I tried millions of them. It didn't work with my son. just doesn't work. It's like it makes it worse, in fact. And it damages the relationship ultimately, which I think is a really important point. When you have a child who is neurodivergent and may or may not yet be diagnosed, and so you may or may not yet understand the way that their brain is working. But one of the most important things that people can take from this conversation is if rewards and consequences don't work with your child, they might be neurodivergent. They might have a neurodivergent brain that doesn't think logically. And it's not their fault, and it doesn't need to be fixed. And it's better to start to try to understand them and work on the connection. How can I help you? And be, as I like to say, compassionately curious about what's going on and what's getting in the way, and start peeling that onion. And what you typically find with most people who have a neurodivergent brain is that they have impaired executive function skills, and their frontal lobes are not maturing at the same rate as other people's executive frontal lobes, which is where the control for the executive functions is, prefrontal lobe and frontal lobe. And that connection between, as you refer to, the back of the brain, but really the back of the brain is the visual lobe, right? It's really the inner brain and kind of the lizard brain where all of our emotions are housed, the amygdala, the limbic system and such. And it's the connection between that and the frontal lobe that is also impacted, as well as dopamine and cortisol, all is impacted. That's why it's neurobiologically and neurochemically based, right? And I learned all of this in PT school, which is why it's so cool that like it's all coming full circle, right? When those connections are impaired and when the frontal lobe is impaired, there's going to be difficulty with self-regulation and difficulty with executive functions. And that's what decreases a person's ability to think logically and to act logically and to control impulses and to use those higher level thinking skills. Okay. So that was a big mouthful, right?
Brilliant. So easily, succinctly said. Thanks for tuning in to part 1 of Courtney Edman's Helping Neurodivergent Kids Thrive and Their Parents Too. Tune back in for part 2 to learn specific parenting strategies and good resources to help your neurodivergent and exceptional child find a pathway to a more balanced life. Less shame, more healthy living for your kiddo and you.
Act 2 You're On was brought to you by Act 2 Share Our Stage. You can find us at a2yo.com and also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please download, listen, and subscribe wherever you find your podcast. You can support us using Patreon or buy us a coffee. I do like coffee. No, you don't need any more caffeine, Kate. Buy Us a Coffee is a platform that folks can use to support entrepreneurs and artists like us, so we can keep providing resources for the doers and dreamers to find connection, purpose, and the skills needed to create a sustainable, fulfilling life to better serve the world, and also so we can buy more coffee. Oh, Kate, thanks for listening, everyone.